Hey, what's up? This is Joyce from creativeandproductive.com. So we're live for July, our Q&A. I'll let you guys join in. In the meantime, I'll go through some of the questions that I received in advance. So we've got a bunch of questions about music licensing, so I'll try to go through as many of them. We've got about half an hour here, so let's jump right in. So the first question I got was, do we need to add the metadata to audio files if we're uploading to SongTrader, or do you need to add? The question was basically if you need to add all the keywords and the ISRC codes and the composer information and the publisher's information in your audio files if you're going to submit to music libraries, or if you can just do that directly on the music library. So in the question, the example was SongTrader, but it really applies to any music library. So my answer here really is you've got two options really. If you're only planning on uploading your songs to SongTrader or music libraries, and you're not planning on sending any audio files directly to people who will open the file on the computer, then you can actually skip the part about adding metadata to your audio files and just focus on adding the metadata directly through the library's platform, because then when someone licenses the track through the library, they'll download the library's file and the library will have the information you included on their platform. Now, if you can foresee a situation where someone asks you for an audio file, for example, because you plan to work with an indie filmmaker or video content creators or production companies directly, or also, there are some music libraries that will ask you for the WAV file directly and not give you access to a backend where you can add your own information. So if you foresee that situation happening, then you should absolutely take the time to add the metadata to your audio files. The purpose of metadata is to give the person who opens the file on their computer the information that they need. So you've probably been in the situation where you double click on an audio file and iTunes or Windows Media Player pops up. It's open and it just says like, the song title and no other information, no artist name, no album name. Maybe that hasn't happened to you in a while because we haven't been trading files as much recently, but I'm sure for the older people like me out there, it's happened to you before. So metadata is meant to prevent that from happening and making sure that the people who have your audio file know when they open your file that it's yours, and they know how to get in touch with you and all of that. So that was the first question. If you have any questions live, by the way, don't hesitate to type them into the chat and I'll do my best to answer. Okay, the second question I got was actually a question about two music libraries. And it was Gary asking for feedback on a couple of music libraries and asking for my experience or if I had any experience or feedback about them. So, the question, what are the best music libraries or advice on, is this library a good one or not? It's a question that I get fairly often, and it's completely understandable because it's a little bit scary to put yourself out there and to submit your music, and you're never quite sure if you're making the right decision or not, and you're afraid of making mistakes, and that's completely understandable. But for me, it's difficult to, like, I don't feel super comfortable giving my opinion on a particular music library, mainly because it's just, if I have experience with them, it's just kind of my experience. So even whether it's good or bad is not really relevant. What works for me may not work for you. What worked for me 6 months ago may not work for me now. So it's really difficult, and I don't want to bad mouth or recommend a company on that basis. So I actually prefer to describe my methodology for choosing a library, which I've done in the past on creativeandproductive.com. So just to go through some of the questions I ask myself real quick. So in order to kind of try to flag if the library is a good fit, I check out the website and just ask myself if I like the website. I also listen to their catalog and ask myself, is this high quality music? Am I happy to be associated with that catalog? is it a good match? I also check, like, do they value my time? And by that I mean, how do they price my music? Do they value it, or is it just like really a commodity? And I'm not saying there's anything wrong against big libraries that price at a low price. It's just something that I take into account. Also, I check how much traffic their website gets. That just kind of gives me an idea of. It's not a perfect measure, but it gives me an idea of, okay, if I invest time and energy in working with that library, do they actually get a lot of potential customers, on their website? Is my music going to be exposed to lots of people, or not really? If it's a more boutique library, I like to get in touch with the artists, the composers who are already working with them, and ask, if they're happy with them. And I also like to review, like, if the customers of the company are happy, but that's more difficult. Sometimes it's not easy to have that information. But for example, I have a friend who works in corporate films, and I know she uses, like, Audio Jungle and Pond 5. So, that just tells me she enjoys those two services. Of course, it's just her opinion, and I try to get as many of those opinions as possible, but it's just a question I ask myself. And probably the most important question I ask myself is, once I've submitted the music and I get an answer, if it's positive, I get the license agreement, like the composer agreement. The big question I ask myself is, if this licensing company never placed any of my tracks, would I be okay with that? And I think that's a great question to ask yourself, because it basically, it kind of, I just assume that the deal is not going to work out. And if it doesn't work out at all, am I okay with that? And that tends to, mean that I tend not to sign exclusive deals where I'm giving away my track in perpetuity. Or if I do it, I will usually test it with a really small, I've only done it twice, I think. I have like 3 or 4 exclusive deals, and I think only 1 or 2 are in perpetuity. I need to check that. But anyway, they only have, like 4 songs max, because I'm kind of testing them before I give them any more, see if they can bring in deals for me. Anyway, so those are like the 7 questions I ask myself, and that's like my methodology for choosing. But then the recommendation that I give, when you're picking libraries and you're intimidated by all the choices you have, just kind of, remember that you will make mistakes, and it's okay. So those questions I just went through are a way of making as few mistakes as possible. But the idea, really, at least my approach, is to try to explore as many avenues as possible. I know it takes time. I know it takes a lot of energy, but there's plenty of music libraries that are free to submit to. It doesn't cost you anything apart from time and energy. And the music industry is so competitive. You need to be willing to spend that time and energy. And little by little, you'll figure out what works for you. Also, keeping in mind the common pitfalls. So some of them I went through, like, when you're signing an exclusive deal, be careful with that. Pricing yourself too low, be careful with that. In perpetuity agreement, like a really long agreement, be careful with that. Those types of things. Just try to mitigate the risks. And if you want to talk about, like, specific music libraries and get, other composers' opinion on that, I actually recommend the Music Library Report. So you need to buy a subscription to access their library reviews, and just remember also on those reviews that they're individual people's opinions. And but still, if you want a little bit of reassurance, it's a cool website. It's not very expensive. You can ask a bunch of questions. There's a pretty active forum, so don't hesitate to sign up with them. It's I'm not affiliated to them at all. It's just I don't do music libraries reviews. So if it's important for you, I really recommend the Music Libraries Report. All right, we've got a few live questions, so I'll go through some of those. Angelina asked, can you use Songtradr if you're signed with CD Baby Distribution and Songtrust Publishing? Yeah, you can. So CD Baby Distribution, that means you just so CD Baby is your music distributor, and they upload your songs on your albums on Spotify and all those streaming services and online stores. And Songtrust, for those who don't know, is an admin publishing company. So they'll handle all your publishing for you, so you don't have to worry about it. They'll do it internationally as well, which is very convenient. But the only thing is they'll take, I think it's a 15% cut of your publishing rights. So instead of earning 100% of publishing, when you self-publish, you have 100% of the writer's share and 100% of the publisher's share. And in that case, Songtrust will take 15% because they act as your publishing administrator. So they don't act as a publisher. They're not going to find you licensing deals, so they're not taking 100% of the cut, but they'll take 15%. And the reason you can still work with Songtrader, so you may not be able to apply to all the licensing opportunities, but you can apply, and you may want to double check that. But Songtrader, usually their opportunities they only take a cut of the publisher's share, so you'll get a sync fee, and they'll take a cut, and they don't take away your publisher's royalties. So it may be different for some of the deals that are with Songtrader, but as long as you're not applying to an opportunity where someone wants 100% of your publisher's share, then it's compatible with Songtrust. But if Songtrust is not compatible with a music library that takes 100% of your publisher's share, because you don't have 115% to give away. You only have 100. So if Songtrust is already taking 15, then you only have 85 left to give away. And for most music libraries, for a lot of music libraries, I shouldn't say most, but a lot of music libraries, that's not enough. They want 100% of the publisher's share. So hopefully that answers your question, Angelina. Tony, glad you're here. Happy to have you. So you're saying, I think it's the deal they're wanting that makes a library worth looking at. Perpetuity, how much they want if you're publishing, etc. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, each deal is different, and you need to figure out if it's worth it for you. I remember signing an exclusive deal in perpetuity on a few of my tracks, and I wasn't comfortable with that. But the reason I did it is it was a very reputable company, and I thought, okay, it's worth the risk. They've been around since like 1990, I think it was. So in the licensing world, that's a long time. In the music industry world, it's a long time. So I thought, okay, I'll give it a shot. It actually didn't work out for me. They didn't place those tracks, but I thought it was worth the risk. And like my music catalog is huge, so I didn't mind that risk. So how do you check how much traffic they have? A web browser extension? Yeah, so you have a Google Chrome extension, for example, called SimilarWeb, where you can check their monthly visits. For example, I just clicked on it, and I'm on YouTube right now, so it's telling me 24 billion monthly visits. That's huge. And just remember when you're doing that. So I use a lot of different search engine optimization tools that give me traffic numbers, and I've noticed that their numbers, like from one tool to another, they'll be different sometimes. So just remember that when you're comparing libraries, always use the same tool. I know it's kind of basic, but it's easy to forget, and then you get confused because the numbers are so different. So SimilarWeb is an extension that's free and easy to install in Chrome. All right, T-Don. You're welcome. Happy to be here. So when you make stems of your songs, do you send those through a distributor like CD Baby, like regular music? No, not at all. So music stems of your songs, your music distributor, they're the people who are making your music available for private consumption. So for individuals to consume, on their phone, in their car, in their computer. So they're just distributing your albums or your songs, but they're not licensing anything. So your stems are only useful, like people will usually ask for your stems when they want to license your track. So they're interested in one of your songs, but they'd like to have the stems of those songs because they want more flexibility. So the stem file will be, usually it's like all the drums um, together on one track, and it, different, one way to think of it is like one instrument is one track. It's a little bit of a caricature, and some people like it different ways. But if you think of one instrument, one section, I should say, as one track. So in an orchestral setting, it might be the horn section will be one stem file. Anyway, all of this is your client, your customer may ask for those stem files, so they have more flexibility. They can bring some instruments in and out. Most importantly, they can bring out the vocals or anything that interferes with voices when they speak. So that's not your music distributor. That's like when you're when you're in the studio, you ask the sound engineer to bounce out your SEM files, or if you're producing your music yourself, you do that yourself. Is that clear to you, Don? Does that make sense to you? Or should you still get ISRC numbers for those stems? Okay, so that's where the confusion comes from. Okay, so yes, ideally you want to get ISRC numbers for your stem files, and you want to burn that into the audio file. In practice, you really don't have to. Like you're not gonna miss out on any licensing opportunities if your audio file doesn't have an ISRC number. So the purpose of the ISRC number is, in theory, it allows for performance rights organization to track. Well, actually, yeah, not the for mechanical rights organization to or sound exchange to track the sound recording that was used on TV or in a digital play. In practice, it doesn't work that well yet, so it's not something I would worry too much about. Basically, if you have a licensing opportunity and your client asks for the stem files, I would just send them the audio file with the basic metadata you can give them, and don't worry too much about ISRC number. Okay, I mix real instruments. I play along with samples and VST instruments to create my final songs. Is that okay for sync licensing? So when you say samples, you mean like Apple loops, or do you mean samples from other people's songs? And just so if it's just like Apple loops and VST instruments, that's fine. Yeah, Apple loops. Okay, so they're usually cleared. You need to be careful depending on the DAW that you use. Some have, in their terms and conditions, you might want to check if they're really royalty free, if you're allowed to. But in theory, if you use Apple loops in your tracks, as long as your work is original, because you've done enough modifications and stuff that your track is unique, then that's fine for licensing. Just keep in mind that a lot of people are using Logic Pro or Pro Tools, Ableton Live. A lot of people are using the same loops and the same VST instruments. And it comes to a point where very often when someone sends me their music, I recognize some of the loops. I actually can't remember, but there's a recent hit song that I really enjoy it. But every time it comes on, I'm like, that's an Apple loop. I've used it in one of my songs. Anyway, so, use them by all means. They're tools, but remember that your music needs to be unique and original, and they're a creative tool basically, and it needs, the most important thing is that your music is original and that it's very well produced for licensing purposes. So as long as it's well produced and it's original, and it's not just obviously loops being stacked on top of each other and like super synthetic instruments being played on a MIDI keyboard, then you should be fine. Okay. You're welcome, Angelina. Hopefully that answered your question. If not, don't hesitate to follow up. Um, and with stems, do you need to copyright them, or are they included when you copyright your song? Okay, that's a good question. No, so when you copyright a song, you should copyright two things. You should copyright the composition, so that's the lyrics and the music, and you should copyright the sound recording, so that's the actual recording. And unless you make huge changes to the recording, I can't remember how they phrase it exactly on the U.S. Copyright Office's website, but basically, unless you make a big change to the recording, then small edits will still will still be protected by that sound recording copyright. So when your stems, they're part of the song they're the composition that you copyrighted, or they're part of the recording, but they're not a different work of art. So you don't need to protect them in any different way than when you do your original copyright registration. Angelina, yeah, I mean Cubase, Ableton Light, all that is basically the same idea. When you're working with loops, there's it's just check their the terms of conditions. I don't know the terms of conditions of Cubase or whatever specifically. I think even in an app, and it's something actually we should probably be checking more often, because they update their terms and conditions as well. But honestly, don't worry about that. I think if suddenly we were not allowed to make music with loops and sell that music, it would be news and we would know about it. And so yeah, go for it. What are you using to burn data into a WAV file? I recommend Kid 3. I think it's called. It's the Kid 3 Audio Tagger. Let me copy paste. It's an open source program. Let me copy paste it here. So it's for those they'll watch the replay. It's kid3.sourceforge.io. But if you type in Kid3 in Google or your favorite search engine, you'll find it. All right, cool. Let me get back to some of the questions I got. Okay, actually, Angelina, that was one of your questions. You asked like how I would suggest setting up your music on your website for licensing. So I answered you by email, and I actually your question inspired the blog post I wrote last week and published last week. But basically, if you're just getting started, I really recommend that you use you upload your tracks on a platform like Songtrader or Audio Jungle, and you accept that platform is going to take a cut of any sales you make. But you can have your website, your composer website, and then have a link for licensing opportunities that just kind of brings people to that Audio Jungle or Songtrader page or whatever platform you choose. The reason for that is that then that platform, they have a price structure in place. They have contracts in place. They have a payment portal in place. So your customer, it makes it super easy for your customer to just, and for you, to just, the customer just picks the songs and downloads it and pays them, and you get your cut. You don't have to worry about any of the admin thing. And I think when you're first getting started, it's super important that you kind of try to streamline all that admin stuff, because I can tell again from the questions you're asking today, the admin stuff is such a worry. It's so scary. There's so many options, so many questions, and the more you can get rid of the admin stuff and focus on what's important, which is getting your music out there and talking to customers and closing deals, the better it is, basically. So that was my recommendation to you. And if you really want to kind of build a website that is not a band website, that's really composer, and you want to be known, kind of build your own music library for your own music, then you can get Bandzoogle with an integration. They integrate with a tool called Airbit. Or what I have but haven't been using that much is I have a WordPress website with a theme called Music Maker that has an e-commerce plugin. They're really popular with people who sell beats. So that's something you can do, but I honestly don't recommend it if you're just starting out. And remember that unless you're already getting a lot of people to your website, your focus should be on getting more people to your website or to your profile on Audio Jungle or Songtrader. If you're not, if you don't have a website or it's not getting a lot of traffic, it's not worth your time yet. The focus should be on growing your audience before you think of really selling in that way. Okay, we've got a few minutes left, so T-Don, when sending music to sync licensing, are they concerned about loudness levels like regular music is? Yes, they are. So not as with loudness levels, it's really how do I put it? Again, it's one of those things I don't think you should worry too much about. Make sure your music is loud enough when you compare it. So when you play it in the middle of a playlist, Spotify playlist of commercial music, it should be as loud. You don't want your music to be quiet. You don't want it to be, much louder. But I don't know how to, try to keep it simple would be my advice. And the way I keep it simple is I just, when I'm mixing and mastering, I do everything myself. So I just make sure I reference my track against similar tracks that are released and successful, not just released by an indie musician who got on Spotify. So I just reference my track against that, and that's my loudness level, really. I don't think you need to go into more, unless you're working as an engineer for a production library, then you don't need to worry about that in detail. You don't have to hit that perfect sweet spot. Is it smart to have a publisher admin like Songtrust? Well, it depends. Like if you're really focused on music licensing, like 100% focused on music licensing, you might want to be careful because, as I mentioned earlier, Songtrust takes a 15% cut of your publishing. And that's actually not a problem in general. Like I think it's a fair revenue model. But if you're focused on licensing, some music libraries want 100% of your publishing, so you can't work with those because you only have 85% left to offer if you have those songs with Songtrust already. So if you're gonna focus a lot on music licensing, I would recommend you focus on licensing and libraries to start with, and then as you build customers, as you get sync placements and stuff like that, you can figure out, if some of the libraries that don't take your publishing are working really well for you, then you can ask Songtrust to to take care of your publishing for those songs. But yeah, it's a trade-off, but at the same time, they Songtrust does a good job, of handling your publishing, so it can be worth it, especially if you have a bunch of plays outside the US. Okay, I think I might have time for a last question. Okay, when recording, should we use 44.1 32-bit or 88K 32-bit? And what if you're trying to distribute and license? What is a good starting point? Well, okay, so if you submit music to music libraries, you'll know that you'll see very quickly that they usually ask for either 44.1 or 48. 48 is the standard for video, so some music libraries will want that. But 44.1 is usually fine. 24-bit is enough, and even 16-bit a lot of the time is fine. So yeah, I'd say don't change anything whether you're focused on distribution or licensing. Again, these are like so today we've had a bunch of technical questions, and as I mentioned earlier, I completely understand that it's you're concerned about that and you want to do everything well, but remember that like the best thing you can do is to actually submit your music to licensing opportunities, and the more you do that, the more you'll learn. So you'll learn which libraries want 44.1. You'll learn which libraries want 48. I usually recommend when you're first starting out to bounce 24-bit, 44.1, and 48. But it's very possible that a library will ask you for 44.1 and 16-bit, and that's fine as well. Just make sure you're able to deliver the music quickly and the audio files they want. All right, I guess that'll be it for today, and I'll talk to you soon. Thanks a lot for joining live, and if you're watching the replay, don't hesitate to drop some questions in the comments, and I'll get back to you as soon as possible. All right, bye everyone.